Hello everybody, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and today I have a promised Gondolin roster update for you. We're going to be looking at the House of the White Wing and a couple of the artillery crews, which will correspond to various gate guards for the 7 gates of the Hidden City. But in addition to, there's also a few other things I want to draw your attention to that will be very prominent in the upcoming replays from the tournament that we'll be hosting. The tournament, I believe, will be starting next week. You can sign up for it on the Silmarillion Discord by talking to either myself or one of our moderators, and they will point you in the right direction. And there are actually some prizes that you can play for. I think the first place is about $150 worth of Steam cards, and second place is, I think, significantly less than that, but there's still something there for second place as well. So there's a lot to put on the line there for the tournament, and we'll also be doing that on our test build, which means you'll be able to play around with some of our new factions if you are interested in playing on it. Sort of a little Christmas gift to everybody out there who supported us for so long. And finally, speaking of Christmas, this is the time of year when the ModDB Mod of the Year competition opens up, and you guys can support the mod and your favorite mods as well. You can vote more than once for different projects and things like that across the website by going over to ModDB. There's going to be a little banner at the top. It'll allow you to vote for a mod for Mod of the Year. If you guys want to vote for us, that would be fantastic, but there are also a ton of other fantastic projects on the site, which I think you should give your care and attention as well. Now, I'm going to give you a quick link to our ModDB, because I can, and because I want to. Let me just quickly fix my thumbnail here too, since apparently I forgot to do that. I was in a bit of a hurry. There we go. Perfect. And this is the link to our ModDB. If you guys want to vote for us, that would be fantastic. Hello, Lord LOSW. I haven't seen you around before. Welcome to the stream. But yeah, so all of that being said, I'll reiterate it all again at the end of the video. Let's go ahead and take a look at the new Gondolin units. And we'll go over the rest of the roster in the meantime, because there are some UI changes that are coming into the mod. They're going to make things, I think, a little bit more transparent for you, and that's a big goal moving into the new 9th Iliad patch, is to make things more transparent for the new people. All of our testers have had a chance to talk to me for the last 8 months to a year kind of thing, and they're all fairly familiar with the systems that we have in place and how we do things like stats and certain things like armor piercing, slashing, piercing, damage types, etc., etc. That should all be a little bit more transparent for you in the coming patch. So let's take one of everything. This unit card here is just temporary, just so we have something to use. There we go. And we'll also be able to see it in the Falas as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of our cool stuff. My name on Discord is Justarius. Oh, hello, Justarius. Welcome, welcome. Hello, Joseph. Thanks for joining us again. It's good to see you. Okay, so just to tease you a little bit, we're going to go over the stuff that we have already seen, and then I'm going to get into the new stuff. And so, let us start with the Shield Bearers of the Tower. I'm going to pop open their stat line here. Thing to know about the Shield Bearers of the Tower, and about Gondolin in general, actually, is that they are a specialist unit, and Gondolin is crewed with many different specialist units. They also have a selection of kind of basic mid-tiers that cover some important sort of fundamental bases, such as a line infantry unit, archers, spearmen, and a little bit of skirmish power. And those 3 basic houses are the Spearmen of the Swallow, the Guardsmen of the Harp, and the Scouts of the Tree. However, Shield Bearers of the Tower, they, as you've probably already seen in some of our previous videos, are heavy spearmen. They do not have the slash or the piercing damage type. Instead, they use slashing. And in a nutshell, piercing damage types will take melee defense penalties against slashing damage types. It is involved in combat resolution. And from the research that I've found from a whole bunch of modders back in the day, that seems to be the exact number. It seems to be about 6 melee defense. So, pretty significant. These guys, however, do not have that drawback. They are quite low in number. Their attack is a little bit lower than your average spearman of their tier and type, just to compensate for the melee defense penalty that they won't be taking. And they also have some unique animations. So I want to go ahead and show you that right now. If you guys are fans of Rome Total War, this is probably going to make sense to you right away. And you'll notice they hold their spears a little bit differently. They will be using them with an overarm grip, which I think is going to resonate with quite a lot of people out there. There's a very fierce debate about whether or not it's overarm or underarm when it comes to like your average sort of like spearmen and how they actually use their weapons in combat. But just to make them a little bit different, the overarm animation is what these guys will be using. It doesn't really have any particular difference that I've been able to remark in actual combat, but the slashing damage type certainly has an impact. Next up, we have the Knights of the Golden Flower. They are not knights in the traditional sense, in that they're not also melee cavalry. But to make them a little bit more interesting, they don't take the normal penalties that Lancers do against elephants, and that is to sort of call back to their lord, Glorfindel, being one of the few people to slay a Balrog in single combat. So they don't take penalties against elephants, but neither do they get any particular bonuses against them. But they do, however, take penalties against other cavalry units, wargs, and so forth. But they are quite quick. They hit hard, and that's really all there is about them. And unlike most cavalry units, they are capped at 3 instead of 2, but you will be paying a premium for them. And that is going to hold true to most of the units that you're going to see, other than the 3 units of the Swallow, the Tree, and the Harp that I outlined earlier. All Gondolin units have 10% tacked on to their base price. They do, however, have some pretty interesting characteristics, and the lack of a penalty against elephants, for example, is one of the more defining characteristics of the Knights of the Golden Flower. Next up here, we have the Champions of the Fountain. Pop that open there. And you can see their stat line. Please ignore the photos. We'll be replacing those in due time. But they have a devastating charge, they have really good stamina, and they're also relentless, which means they do not have a blocking animation, which significantly increases their damage output in practical terms. They also have a minor missile deflection bonus, which is something that previously only the House of Gondolin, who specialized in longswords, had available to them, but the Champions of the Fountain will have that as well, and that will only apply to them from the front, of course, because it's hard to block something you can't see coming. Their defense skill is pretty good. Their armor is also pretty good. But two-handed axemen are still relatively efficient against them. And, yeah, they also do kind of lack a little bit in their numbers. But yeah, so they're a really highly damaging unit. I think you can only bring 2 of them in total, and they're also quite expensive at 1,100. Next, we have the Guardsmen of the Harp, which is a bit... There's 2 things at play here. So first I want to draw your attention to the fact that it says medium infantry. Previously we only had heavy and light, and I thought that was all that you can do. But thanks to the DAC team, they opened my eyes a little bit, and now I'm able to expand that. So not only do we have a medium infantry classification, we also have a medium cavalry classification. And that plays a lot into making things more transparent. So medium units tend to fall between 5 to 7 thereabouts. And light units generally go from 1 to 4 or 0 to 4. And those would be considered light infantry. And there's all kinds of things that play into this. So I want to draw your attention, with that in mind, to the Scouts of the Tree. And we'll come back to them and we'll go over them in detail in a moment. But you'll also notice that they have ammunition, a little blue ammunition bar that indicates that they have a missile. But they also have the light infantry classification. There are many units in the game that have a missile but are not considered dedicated skirmishers. And there are some consequences of that, and I can always explain that to you if you guys are unclear on it. But the important thing to note is that dedicated skirmishers and dedicated infantry use different stat templates. And in practical terms, it translates to better skirmishing abilities for the dedicated skirmishers and better close quarters melee stats for the infantry classifications. And the Scouts of the Tree are the latter type. So they are more like infantry. They're going to have higher melee defense, higher attack, that sort of thing. But anyway, so let's move on over to the Guardsmen of the Harp. Really sexy model made by Skyly. I did a little bit of tweaking on it as well. but the majority of the work that went into this unit actually belongs to Skyly, although they have a skirmish mode here now too. And I do this by, I've achieved this with the help of the DAC team by making them a skirmisher classification, but I can actually change what the label is, so that's why they have the skirmish mode there, which is something that obviously I need to disable for all the medium infantry. But in any case, Guardsmen of the Heart, let's take a look at their stat line. Oops, that's the wrong one. There we go. Guardsmen of the Heart. Pretty average, although very inexpensive. Probably one of the cheapest Elven units that you're going to find in any roster. Which is there mostly to balance out the fact that Gondolin units are quite expensive on average. And this is sort of a necessary thing to have these cheaper units that cover certain baselines, because my experience in playing other mods pre-0.95 Reforged was that certain factions were so expensive that you were railroaded into like one or two different builds, and that of course has now changed over time, but pre-0.95 that was definitely the case with the High Elves, for example. So that's something that I've tried to carry forward and learn from. So yeah, that's why you have these little cheaper baseline units. That's sort of the idea behind them. Next up, we have the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch. And there's some cool little lore faction flavor to come out of this. So the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch, their thing is that they are quite small, but they have very, very high armor values. They were one of the richer houses. But it is said in the Fall of Gondolin that the archers of Gondolin could rain arrows day and night upon any attacking force and not run out of arrows after a year. And while I don't really want to go to that extreme, the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch do have significantly increased ammunition reserves over other high-tier archers of their type. So, they have less men, they're very tanky, but they can fire for longer, throw more arrows, or shoot more arrows downrange than other high-tier archers. And they're also pretty expensive as well, and like decent enough infantry after the fact. But they are held back by the fact that they are a missile unit here. So all dedicated skirmishers are going to have that classification, missile. So you know by looking at that the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch combat stats are going to be lower than they otherwise would be, because they are considered to be dedicated skirmishers rather than an infantry unit. Over here, same thing with the Spearmen of the Swallow. This is one of the lower tier units. Lower tier, it's like lower mid tier. Fairly cheap, limited ammunition, however, because they are not a dedicated archer. The only dedicated archer, well, they are like a dedicated archer in terms of like the templates that they use, but if you're looking for like longevity and the sort of things that you would expect from a high tier bowman, or just bowmen generally, then the Heavenly Archer where you want to go. These guys are more hybrids. Now, you can't see them on the back, but they will get it eventually. The Spearmen of the Swallow have spears, and they can whip those out, and they're fairly decent at holding the line or scaring off cavalry, that sort of thing, just defending your back lines and so forth. They're not really like a front line like damaging sort of unit, but they do have their uses with their missiles, which they can use for harassment, of course, and then their spearmen after the fact, so you can use them to defend your back lines. Always a nice thing to have. Next, we have the Lords of the Golden Flower. This is one of the 2 bodyguard units for Gondolin, and they are multiple HP. You can see that they're 3 HP, but I think they're the only non-elephant unit to have more than 2 HP. They've also got their Lord Glorfindel, who leads the unit. You can see him right there. And they have substantially increased bonuses against elephants, because, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Glorfindel is famous for taking on a Balrog in single combat and beating him. I don't know if they have genders. In any case, the Lords of the Golden Flower, extremely potent. They are relentless, so they do not have to block, and that's kind of a necessity when you have a smaller unit like this. And to compensate for the lack of numbers, they do have 3 HP. So, incredibly tanky, good armor values, really, really high defense skill, but they are held back by the fact that they are extremely expensive at 1650, and of course, they have only 38 men in the unit, so they can be overwhelmed. You just have to be aware of them, and address the threat posed by this unit accordingly. If you are, say, Angband, for example, you're probably going to want to shoot at them with crossbows. Next, we have the second bodyguard unit. This one is a 1 HP. It's also capped at 1, unlike most 1 HP bodyguards. But the Retainers of the King have a 3 morale buff in 50 meter radius, so they are extremely useful for keeping some of the higher or even lower mid-tier units like the Harp and the Swallow, etc., in the fight for longer. And a lot of the high-tier Gondolin units have really beefy morale scores, so as long as you have the House of the King around, you can count on your Gondolin units to hold the line against some pretty incredible odds. They are one of the few Gondolin units that can actually upgrade their armor. You don't see it here, but you can bring it. It does cost a little bit extra. I think it costs about 33% extra, so it's 80 instead of 60. And they cost 1,100 gold to bring. So expensive, but they are worth it. And I think this is going to be the default bodyguard, whereas the Lords of the Golden Flower will be a little bit more specialized. And now we have the Armorers of the Hammer. Actually, I was mistaken earlier. This is the House of the King were one of 2 units that can upgrade their armor. The other one is the Armorers of the Hammer. They can boost themselves to a formidable 14 armor. They've also got a decent defense skill of 10. They cause fear. They have really, really good charge bonuses for what they are. Because the House of the Hammer of Wrath, very impetuous, actually charged outside the walls of Gondolin, took the fight to the armies of Morgoth on the outside. They were subsequently wiped out, but it was a last stand worthy of song. And so I've tried to reflect that in the unit itself. They are quite expensive at 1075, but this is one of the few armor-piercing options that the Gondolin have to bring in melee. The other one being the Scouts of the Tree, because they have maces, but again, we'll get to them. We're almost there. Next, we have the Axemen of the Pillar. Some people are probably going to take issue with the fact that they are, in fact, elves and not men, but they use it in the books, so... In any case, Axemen of the Pillar, they have okay armor. They've got pretty good defense skill. They're fairly comparable to the Doriath Axemen in a few ways, in that they take half penalties from the melee defense debuff that comes from using an axe inherently. They also have an increased shield value and a little bit of extra charge bonus, and their base damage is higher, so their end damage, after all bonuses and such have been applied to them, is a little bit higher than the Doriath Axemen, who I think weigh in at about 12 instead of 14. So yeah, that's kind of their thing. That's their specialist role, is that they are quite damaging, they're reasonably well armored, they have a little bit more survivability, and damn do they hit like trucks. Look at that charge bonus, look at that attack value. That is extremely high for a one-handed unit in the mod. And then we move on to the last of the units that you've already seen. We can move on to the new stuff afterwards. And those would be the House of the Tree. And I've basically talked about them at this point. They're slingers, so their base damage is quite low, but they have a solid range of about 120, which I'm not sure that many people realize it, but slings actually outranged bows of the period, like in the classical period when you'd see a lot of people actively using slings. Yeah, they actually outranged or were of comparable range to bows of the period. And so that is reflected in game. Their arc functions fairly similarly to a crossbow. You need obvious line of sight. You can't arc your slingshots because that's a little bit ridiculous. But they are also capable light infantry after the fact. 4 shield doesn't offer a lot of protection, but they do have 8 skill and a low armor value of 4. And of course, because they have the little light infantry classification there, you know right away that they use the infantry template, and so their combat stats are a little bit higher. And so, before we move on, let me take a look at some questions here. Model's looking like a snack. Thank you, thank you. It's a lot of work there from the whole team that got put in. Hello, my favorite developer. Will you be showing a 1v1 between the Haladin and Gondolin units? Not today, I won't, but eventually. How am I? I am great, thank you. Slingers, actually Marines, Belfast in disguise. Yeah, I know. We have to fix the pictures there, but we do actually have someone on the team who's dedicated to doing that, so hopefully that's something that we'll be able to do once the update goes live. But I don't see any other questions in there, so let's pop over here and take a look at the Gallants of the White Wing. This, and I don't mind saying it, is probably one of the greatest models I've seen in just about any submod that I have played for Medieval 2 Total War. Castellan of Angmar is the person behind it, and he did a fantastic job here. I think he might have even shaved off a few years of his own life trying to get this this thing done and retextured for us, so we'd have a fully functional Gondolin faction. So what you're looking at here is actually a part of a man's soul, so I hope you appreciate it. But yeah, they look fantastic, and I'm really, really excited to play with these guys in game. So, conceptually, there is some overlap between the House of the White Wing and the Guardsmen of the Harp. except that they are like on different tiers. And anybody who knows anything about the way that I approach mod development knows that I don't like to have redundant units. And so let's talk a little bit about the Gallants of the White Wing and what they do. Obviously their damage is a little bit higher, charge bonus is obviously a little bit improved over the lower tier Guardsmen of the Harp. That is, I think, fairly obvious. But the thing that these guys do well is that they come with a morale bonus to units that are nearby. So it's 2 morale and 25 meters. They are one of 2 units in the Gondolin roster that can actually inspire. And so I think that there is potential to mix these guys in with your lower mid-tier units. The House of the Wing were sort of a source of hope for the defenders of Gondolin throughout the Siege of Gondolin, and they're led by Tuor, who is the father of Eärendil, who is an extremely important character in Tolkien's first age sort of mythology. They were a newer house, and so they were a bit smaller. So you're going to see the House of the White Wing in smaller numbers than you would some of the other houses. They are capped at 2, and that's partially to conform with the lore, and also because they have a Inspire ability, and the morale values for Gondolin are quite high across the board. The things that they do particularly well, however, as you probably noticed, is their melee defense. So they are technically heavy infantry. They also enjoy medium infantry speeds and light infantry melee defense bonuses, which is how they get to that massive value of 15. And so, where units like, say, the Hammer of Wrath, for example, would struggle with their 10 melee defense against units that have high armor piercing, for example, and high damage, the House of the White Wing will be able to hold their ground much better. They are very good at tar pitting with that high defense bonus of 15. And so that's sort of their shtick. They're a good little support unit. They mix in really nicely with the mid-tier units that you're going to want to bring as Gondolin anyway. And they do offer some fairly strong tar pitting abilities. So you can expect to throw them against most mid and high tier units from other factions, and they will acquit themselves quite well in melee. And now we move into some of the more exciting bits. Well, at least that I personally find to be exciting, because this is something that was made... This is a decision that I made kind of like on the go. So Gondolin as a city is protected by 7 gates. You're going to find 7 comes up a lot in Tolkien's writing. 7 levels of Minas Tirith, the 7 gates of Gondolin. There's 7 rings for the dwarf lords, etc., etc. So 7 comes up a lot. And so the individual gate garrisons have their own sort of character, and I've tried to take the aesthetic, at least as described in the books, and put that into the Silmarillion Total War meta in a way that makes sense. And so, every single one of the artillery is going to have a different unit inspired by the Gate Guard, and they are all going to have some sort of unique or interesting functionality to them. So, for example, we've got a halberd unit here, and we've got a 2-handed spear unit here, which are both, as you've noticed, conspicuously absent from the rest of the Gondolin roster. And this is partially because I thought it would be cool, and partially because Gondolin won't have detachments. So instead of detachments, you're going to get some beefier artillery crews with some higher numbers and some unique flavor to them. And so, the Ballista, currently in Silmarillion Total War, I don't know if this is the case on live, but on the test build this is certainly the case. The Ballista damage has been lowered, but their accuracy has been increased. Their firing arc has been increased a little bit as well, so they don't hit the ground quite so often. They have more of like almost a rainbow-esque arc instead of just a flat, like vertical plane arc, which would end up with them hitting the ground more often unless you elevated the Ballista on higher ground. But the consequence of that is that they are quite good at hunting single entity units. Monsters like Uroloki and Balrogs, they can take a really big piece off of them, especially with their flaming ammunition. Sometimes they can actually kill them outright. So they do make a decent counter to those types of units, and thus the guards of the Gate of Stone, who were said to be clad in gray and so forth, they have been included as the crew, and they will have 2-handed spears, which are particularly effective monster hunting units. So not only do we have a new unit here, but the crew and sort of their nature and their use actually reflects the nature of the artillery crew that they man, and that's going to be consistent throughout here in one way or another. And so we move on now to the Trebuchet. All of the Noldor factions will have the Trebuchet. One thing I see people do a lot, especially those that are new, is bring trebuchets in field battles. I really think you should not do this. The accuracy on trebuchets has been deliberately kept down when it comes to hitting infantry or other siege weapons. What they are really good at, though, is crumbling walls. And currently we don't have a ton of like walled siege maps outside of like the stuff that we've borrowed from Reforged, or the stuff that's like just vanilla and in all Medieval 2 mods and games, etc. So you don't see the trebuchets as much, but you will eventually. And if you do find yourself in a siege situation, bring a trebuchet. Otherwise, maybe give it a bit of a miss. And so, the guards using it, or crewing it, I suppose, are guards from the Gate of Silver. I've actually borrowed some boathead assets from this, so you're going to notice some of those high elf helms there, and the shoulders there as well. They're also armed with formidable halberds, and you can see that they even have the spear wall formation, and I think I forgot to mention that. No, so these guys here don't have spear wall, but they do have Schiltrim. These guys have spear wall, so they'll function like any other halberd unit after they're out of ammunition, which can be particularly useful in a siege, for example, where choke points tend to favor pole arms, and that's one of the things that the Gondolin just don't have anywhere else, and so they can get it in a fairly limited way through the trebuchet. And since usually attackers tend to have higher funds than the defenders, you will probably be able to bring about 2 of these fairly reliably. So that's a decent contingent of halberds that you can use to kind of even the odds in a siege situation. Next, we have the catapult. Catapult is best suited for open field battles and preying upon infantry units. The crew themselves are drawn from the descriptions of the Gate of Bronze. They've got like alternating little bits of like feathers here, and these are actually Sindar from the city of Nevrost. And so I've given them axes, and the axes are described as being red bladed, and so you can probably see it there. We have in fact included the red blade on it. After the fact, they are fairly capable light infantrymen. Actually, they're more like medium infantry. They've got axes, they got a decent charge value. And you can usually bring 2 of them fairly reliably if you want to go a bit more mid-tier heavy. You can definitely bring 2 catapults, and so you'll have a couple units of mid-tier axemen that you can use, and you can maybe forego the axemen of the pillar in that regard, although the axemen of the pillar are, of course, far superior and more numerous. So, yeah, they're not a replacement, they're just an option if you think you can get more use out of a catapult than you can a high-tier axe unit. But that is it for the Gondolin room so far. There is only one single unit left, and I didn't really want to delay showing off this fantastic model here for the House of the Wing any longer than I had to. And as I've mentioned a few times on stream already, the final unit for the Gondolin room will be a legendary company, and it will be a pike unit called the Phalanx of the King. And it will be sort of an alternative version of the Retainers of the King, though it won't quite have the same bodyguard percentage bonuses that they, of course, enjoy. But, oh, wow. Let's pop open chat here and see if I've missed anything so far. Two-handed bodyguard unit for Gondolin could actually go toe-to-toe with the Sons of Hurin. Maybe. The Sons of Hurin hit pretty damned hard. I think that would be an interesting fight, though. They're beautiful, just like in the book. Thank you so much. I mean, it really comes down to having a talented team. Some of the stuff some of these units I've done, but I've like used like existing things and like tried to make them new in various ways. But people like Taurion, or people like Skyly and Sin of the Darkcloud, who made the Retainers of the King, and Skyly in particular did the House of the Heart. He also did the Axemen of the Pillar and the Armorers of the Hammer. And so these are all things that are made from the talented people on my team, without whom we really wouldn't be here today. So yeah, a lot of appreciation and respect for those guys, and I appreciate their putting up with me for a year and a half. But anyway, let's move on now. Castellan sacrificed his soul. Yeah, he really did. He had a 7 fetish. I think I'm sure that there is some similarities or some like crossover with sort of the faith of the author, and like 7 being sort of like a holy number, if I'm not making a mistake there, etc., etc. Do I watch anime? I don't really watch a lot of anime. I think the last anime I watched was Black Clover, and that was just because it was so cringeworthy that I just couldn't turn away from it. But let's bring things back to Gondolin. If you guys have any questions about the faction, about the direction of them, or maybe about the Haladin, or potentially about the Dwarven faction, of which there will be news soon, I hope, then go ahead and ask, and I will leave the stream up for just a few more minutes. The power of Gondolin, they have arrived. Yes, very, very soon. I will have this build available to YouTubers and to our testers. I am hoping that I will be able to get a video up on Pixelated Apollo's channel, so that might be lots of fun, and that should be a Gondolin scenario. So we're going to use Rex's Gondolin map. We're going to recreate the fall of Gondolin as best as we are able, and it should be pretty damned epic. So, really excited to bring that to you guys. Let's see if we have any other questions here. How many factions are left to be added? Just one that's like completely, utterly set in stone and like will 100% happen. I am thinking about a 14th faction only for multiplayer. Or no, it's a 13th faction, I think. Yes. Should be a 13th faction only for multiplayer. And I was thinking about playing around with Valinor and adding sort of like a hybrid faction of like Sindar, Teleri, Noldor, and Vanyar, who make up the majority of the faction. But for now, we're going to content ourselves with the dwarves, and that will they're the last faction that will be in both multiplayer and campaign. If I do end up adding Valinor, they will be a multiplayer exclusive faction, but they will also be sort of a big bad for Angban's campaign endgame. So we do have some plans for campaign and some ways to keep it challenging throughout, and Valinor is a big part of that for the evil factions in any case. Why are there only 38 men in the heavy swordsman unit? I don't mind going back and talking about that again. Here, in just a second. So, the Lords of the Golden Flower. Let's take a look at their stat line here. Multiple HP. They are also relentless, and they hit extremely hard. So, the reason that they are lower in number is one, because they represent sort of the upper crust of the nobility, and that is just fitting. And also, it's a balance issue. If they were massive, then they wouldn't be able to be as powerful, and they wouldn't kind of be as interesting and unique. And if I were to make them really, really big and just really, really strong, then what would be the purpose of the Champions of the Fountain? Because there's some overlap there, right? These guys sacrifice numbers and risk being overwhelmed in melee if unsupported for some really serious damage against elephants in particular, and also the 3 HP and so on and so forth. So if they were just massive, there'd be too much overlap. And I wouldn't be able to make them as strong as I wanted to. I wanted to represent the sort of best of the House of the Golden Flower. Are they any stronger than the Elven King's Palace Guard? I think that's a reforged unit, and I can't quite remember. I think that they're like a 2 HP armor piercing unit that's like maybe about double the size of the Lords of the Golden Flower. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't really concern myself too much if like whose unit is stronger, because it's two different metas, right? Like it's totally different like approaches to the same thing. So it's really impossible for me to answer that question. Hello, Manus. Welcome to the stream. But if you guys have any other additional questions, I'm going to leave the stream open for another 5 or so minutes, and then I'm going to have to go on about my day. So if you guys have any questions about Gondolin, campaign, etc., I will do my best to answer them in a very short period of time. And while you formulate those questions, I will take a moment to remind you that the ModDB Mod of the Year awards are currently open, and you guys are able to vote in them. So if you guys want to show your support for Silmarillion Total War in that competition, you can see our ModDB page in the little chat there, and you can head over to the ModDB site, vote for us, and vote for any other mods that you feel are worthy of claiming that title of Mod of the Year. And I would also like to remind everybody that we do have a tournament coming up on Silmarillion Total War. There are some fairly decent prizes that are up for grabs. I think there's about $150 worth of Steam cards that are available for first place, so about 75 per person. It's a 2v2 tournament. And if you guys are interested in getting involved in that, then I recommend that you head on over to the Silmarillion Discord. You can find the link for that in the description here, but I will also put it in the chat for you as well. And there you go. And if you guys are interested in getting involved in that particular tournament, then you can either talk to myself or to any of our moderators, and they will either add you to the tournament themselves or they will direct you towards the right people. But yeah, I don't think we have too many other questions. So I will probably shut the stream down there. Looks like the unit card needs some tweaking. Yeah, it probably needs to be brought a little bit more in line with the style that we have, but I think Steward of Dale said he was able to do that. It just might take him a few days to get it done. So if you're busy, Castellan, then like don't stress about it. You have obviously you worked extremely hard in this unit, so I don't want to put any more pressure on you than what I would need to. But yeah, if you have time, then absolutely I will add a new unit card in. But for now, this it does the job. Campaign progress, it's about the same as 4 days ago when I streamed and people asked about campaign progress. We do have an elevation map and a region map that are done for the campaign, so that's like a big step in the right direction. But it will take just a lot of like grunt work and like getting all the coding and the events and like all the things kind of figured out. But a basic overview of our campaign is that I want logistics to be a serious concern for you. So you will have certain settlements that are castles. So in Medieval 2, castles are places you can recruit certain military units from that you wouldn't be able to recruit elsewhere. We're going to lean really heavily on that to assign a sort of very, very heavy strategic value to certain settlements. And probably about 33% of all settlements will have this sort of classification. So they're worth fighting over, and they're important recruitment hubs. So losing those can be a really big problem. Not only is this, I think, strategically interesting, but it does also hopefully cut down on the amount of stack spam that you have to endure. Because I really want, moving forward into the campaign, your battles to matter. I don't want you to fight 30 stacks and get bored just because it doesn't feel like there's any point. You know what I mean? Like there's no... Okay, cool, I just killed another stack of orcs from Angband, and now I gotta kill another one. Like I want you to feel accomplished when you have these victories, and so we're looking at ways that we can sort of limit stack spam and like give you that like sense of accomplishment. But also, by the same token, because recruitment is limited, and we will lean also heavily on region locked units and so on and so forth, losing an army and losing a battle really, really hurts you, and I think that that's kind of how it should be. I think there's lots of... There's a really strong challenge to that sort of like approach that I think will keep you interested from start to finish in the campaign, rather than, you know, getting to the middle of the campaign, you get that sort of like turn 70, turn 90 ennui, and then you're like, cool, I can already see the end here because I'm steamrolling everybody, and then you just lose all interest. And that's not what I want to have happen in the Silmarillion Total War campaign, so we will have a fairly complex recruitment system, and that is going to play into some overall goals too, just keeping it fun and challenging throughout the entire campaign. And all of both the Elven and the like good side factions and the evil factions will have a big bad at the end of their campaign. For the Elven factions, it may end up being the House of Feanor, and for the House of Feanor and, well, possibly for the House of Feanor and for the Orcish faction, certainly that will definitely be Valinor, because there needs to be something at the end there to like make it difficult. Once you've established this massive empire and you start to steamroll your way through everybody, then there needs to be someone to kind of like stop you and like check that and give you that like final sort of rush as you get towards the finishing line on your campaign. So yeah, that's more or less our campaign in the nutshell. Can I ask where the best place to get Silmarillion is because you really want to get it? Yep, ModDB, and while you're over there, why not vote for us for Mod of the Year? After this, I should watch Demon Slayer. I will like it a lot. That's funny that you mentioned that, actually. A friend of mine sent me Demon Slayer, so, you know, maybe I will. Just gotta find time to watch things. You know, has a slight Elder Scrolls touch. Yeah, I can see that. I can see there's sort of like the, there's some similarities between the House of the Wing, especially the helmet, and like the elven helmets from Skyrim. I can definitely kind of see what you're getting at there. But yeah, if you scroll up just a little bit there, Manus, I put a link to our Discord and to our ModDB, and that's where you can download the mod, and then the people in the Discord can help you get set up. Will Skyly's new artillery models be added to Silmarillion Total War? I didn't know that he had new artillery models. If he wants to share them, absolutely. But if he doesn't, then he doesn't. I'm totally open to it, though. But I didn't even... That's new to me. I didn't even know. Okay, well, I think that's going to do for today. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you're excited for the new patch and for the tournament. And if you guys want to play around with some of the new stuff, then we will have the tournament available for people. But there is only limited slots, however. This is not something that everyone can do because we're not interested in having like a 60-person tournament. That would be way too much to manage. I think there are currently 12 teams that are fully filled out, and there will be 16 in total. So if you guys want to join, drop by the Discord, let us know. And